Hi there, my name is Mark Smith. I'm with Xamarin University, and I want to introduce you to the Xamarin Live Player. To start with, let's talk about some of the problems that the Xamarin Live Player is designed to overcome. If you've done mobile development for any length of time, you're probably aware that there isn't really a click and run solution like we get with desktop and web apps. It's one of the reasons why people like Xamarin Forms, because they can run it as a desktop solution and test it locally without having to deal with devices and emulators and simulators. Because Xamarin's all about cross-platform development, you likely have a lot of devices and different emulators and simulators set up. And in fact, to do iOS development, you have to have a Mac because we need to be able to build and package the application on the Mac, and the Apple simulator only runs on a Mac. We remote it over to Windows, but you still have to have the Mac to get it to run. On the Android side, we can run all the things on Windows, but you have to install a variety of libraries and SDKs and Google extensions and emulators and get them all running and keep them all up to date, and it's just tedious and a lot of work. It's just a lot of trouble. And that's exactly why we've built the Xamarin Live Player. The Xamarin Live Player is designed to get you started right away by allowing you to use your local devices connected directly to Visual Studio on either Windows or on the Mac. We use your Wi-Fi network to connect the two together, and then Visual Studio can push the code right into your device and play it within the Xamarin Live Player. This gives you the ability to develop and debug your application locally on your device with a minimal amount of setup, so that you can get started right away using your local devices. So how does it work? Well, the first thing that you need is you need the Xamarin Live Player. You can download this from the Google Play or the App Store. It runs on either iOS or Android, and it's just an app. Next, you need to install the Visual Studio Preview. This is for Windows or the Mac. Because this is a preview that's been released, it's included as part of the preview bits. Now, the Visual Studio Preview is accessible through visualstudio.com/vs/preview. That website will allow you to download an installer, and you can see here that we can download it for community, professional, or enterprise. The key thing to understand about the installer, at least for Windows, is that you can install this side by side with any existing release of Visual Studio. So if you want to keep your development machine capable of building your production builds, or at least testing your release builds, then you can keep Visual Studio 2015 or a release version of 2017 installed side by side with the release preview of 2017. The release preview is installed in its own folder, has its own dependencies, and is completely independent. Once you've got the Visual Studio Preview installed, you'll want to go to the Visual Studio Marketplace and install the Xamarin Updater. This is available as an extension. Go to marketplace.visualstudio.com and search for Xamarin Updater. Go ahead and install the VSIX that gets downloaded, and then open up Visual Studio 2017 and go to the Tools menu and Extensions and Updates, and then update any packages that you find that need to be updated there. Once you're done with this, you'll have to restart Visual Studio to actually get all of these things to install. Then you can verify the install by relaunching Visual Studio 2017, opening any Xamarin iOS or Android application, including a Xamarin Forms application, and you should find a new option in the Devices dropdown that says Live Player. If you don't see that, then go back and double check all the steps that we've just covered. The Mac side's a little bit easier to deal with. You get the Xamarin Live Player bundled with Visual Studio for Mac. So just use the Apple menu and check for updates to make sure you've got the latest version installed. And then you can verify that through the menu and just look for the Xamarin Live Player with the Manage Devices at the bottom of the Tools menu. Next, you need to make sure that your development machine and your device are on the same Wi-Fi network. We're going to use the network to communicate between the two pieces of hardware. Then you're ready to actually pair your device. You can do this through the Tools menu in Visual Studio. There's a Xamarin Live Player option, and it's going to have a Manage Devices menu. If you've never paired a device, then the Devices drop-down will actually include a Live Player option, which will allow you to pair the device in the same way. And ultimately, what you'll get is a dialog with a barcode. Once the app is running on your actual device, you can then use the app to pair to Visual Studio by scanning that barcode with the camera. Alternatively, there will be an alphanumeric code that's actually displayed by the Live Player app on the device, and you can type that code into Visual Studio in order to pair the two devices as well. Notice that I have two physical devices paired to Visual Studio here, both an iPhone and an Android device. You can pair as many devices as you like, and then you can remove the devices at a later time by managing them. When you're actually going to run the app, you'll want to select the appropriate device from the drop-down in the devices list based upon which app you're actually attempting to run. So how do we run the code? Well, it turns out it's very easy. You need to have the Live Player launched on the actual device, and then you're going to select the particular startup project you need, either iOS or Android, pick the device from the device drop-down that you've paired, and then you'll simply click the Run button. You can also use the debug menu and use any of the debug options to be able to run it directly on the device. And the cool thing is the app will then go ahead and come up on your actual physical device, and you'll be able to interact with it just like you would if it had been deployed to the device. Now, there's a second way you can actually run the app as well, called Live Run Mode. This allows you to actually do a REPL style of development. So let me tell you the scenario. Say, for instance, that you're building a Xamarin Forms app, and you're sort of working and tooling around with the UI and trying out various things, colors and things like that. You can actually put the app into Live Run Mode through the menu that you can see here. So it's in the Tools menu, Xamarin Live Player, Live Run Current View. That will have the app running on the device, and the interesting thing is you can make changes to the source code right there in Visual Studio, and those changes are automatically pushed over to the device and run immediately. So for example, I could start adding new UI elements into the visual tree. I could change colors, fonts, text, move things around, and I can actually see them happening live on the device as I make those source code changes. This is an incredibly powerful way to be able to build your app in a step-by-step fashion without the traditional compile, deploy, run, test sort of scenario that we have as a developer. So let's see it in action by actually trying out the Live Player. So here I am in Visual Studio with Windows, and I'm projecting my iPhone using AirPlay and Reflector, which is a tool that you can purchase in order to see the display of your phone on your PC. And it works on both Windows and Mac, although on a Mac you can just use QuickTime. And in Visual Studio, here I have a solution loaded from Xamarin University, which is the calculator that we build during the XAML class. And my goal is to actually run it here using the Live Player. And so you can see I've got the Xamarin Live Player installed on the phone, and I've actually launched it. It's just an app you download from the iOS App Store. And it's already actually set up and ready to go. What I need to do is I need to pair it to this Visual Studio instance. And so I can go to Tools, Xamarin Live Player, Manage Devices, and you can see that I've actually already paired this device, Mark's iPhone Player, iOS, with this Visual Studio instance. And if I hover over this, I can actually delete that instance if I want to. But if I pull this down, you can see I'm only seeing local machine and then some simulators. And it's because the project type I have selected here is the UWP project. And so what I need to do is I need to select a project that's going to be paired up with the specific device that I'm trying to run it on, in this case iOS. So I'm going to switch to the iOS instance here, and now this becomes the startup project, and now you can see that in my devices list I now have Mark's iPhone Player because I've paired it. Now I could actually go to the Live Player here, so for instance if I wanted to repair this, or if for example I wanted to pair a different device, I can pull this up and then it gives me this barcode, and I can take my phone and I can tap that Pair to Visual Studio and then take it over to the barcode and just make sure that the phone sees the barcode there, and what will happen is those two will then be paired. And now you can see that my Xamarin Live Player is actually connected. It actually changes state here. And at this point I can now click the play button to actually launch the calculator right on my iPhone. So we're going to do that. And then you'll see that the calculator actually comes up, and now I can interact with it on the device. Now I can't interact with it here on the Windows screen because Reflector doesn't do bidirectional interaction, but I can type on the device itself and actually get responses, which is pretty darn cool. And this is a totally interactive environment. So for example, if I go into the solution itself, and I'm going to go into the simple calculator code here. So this is the shared code that's actually driving the calculator, which is very, very simple. But I can put a breakpoint here on math operator, for example. And now when I actually do something with the calculator, say for instance we clear this and we say 5 times 5 equals, and notice that it stops on my breakpoint. Now this is really cool because I'm not using a Mac build host here. In fact, I don't even have a Mac build host connected to this machine. This is strictly done through the Live Player, the Azure service that the player is interacting with, and the extension that's in Visual Studio. So all three of those things are coming together in order to actually execute my code here. And the interesting thing is I can actually hover over these values and I can see the values represented here. So in other words, I get full debugging symbols. I can do the standard types of debugging that you're used to when you're actually deploying onto a real device or a simulator. So this is pretty darn cool. But it gets cooler than that. So I'm going to stop this. And I'm going to go ahead and start a new project now. So let's do File, New, Project. And I'm going to go to Visual C# cross-platform. And I'm going to go ahead and make this my cars. And we'll just put it on the desktop, that's fine. And click OK. And then we're going to go ahead and make it a Xamarin Form. Shared project is fine. I'm going to use a blank app and say OK. And then it's going to ask me for my version of UWP. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK and take the defaults. And my project is created. So notice again, now the Android project is the one that's selected here. So if I look up here, I only see Live Player, and then I see my simulators. I can click the Live Player button, but it's just going to prompt me to actually register an Android device in this case. I could go find my Android device and scan the barcode, or you can enter the alphanumeric code that's on that page right here in order to tie those two together as well. But instead, I'm going to go ahead and just use the iOS app here. And let's just go ahead and give this a shot. So again, I'm going to run it. And it's going to come up and actually display right here on the phone. So you can see it comes up and it says, Welcome to Xamarin Forms. That's really cool. But this time I'm going to stop. And notice that the other thing that I can do here is now I'm no longer debugging. The app's not running. You can see that it's there on the Xamarin Live Player. I'm going to go to the debug menu and I'm going to say start without debugging. So you can also just use Control F5. And so I get my Welcome to Xamarin Forms again, but now I'm no longer debugging in Visual Studio. But here's the cool thing. I can actually go into the code here and I can start making edits to this code in a live fashion. Now, you may have to go and turn on Xamarin Live Player, Live Run Current View. That's another way to get to this page. So you can either launch it without the debugger, or you can use that if you're on the page that you actually want to display. But the interesting thing is now I can come in here and I can change some of the elements that are here. So we can say, for example, Xamarin Live Player. And I just go ahead and save this file, and notice that it changes right there inside my device. And again, this is running on a physical device. There's no Mac build host, but I'm seeing those things happen live. That's why we call it the Live Player. It's actually making those edits live as it runs the code in our host app. But we can actually get a lot better than this. Say, for example, that I actually want to start a new app here. And so I'm going to say, let's create a list view. And again, you can see now, as soon as I save it, I get a list view here. It's completely interactive. There's no data in it yet, but we can fix that. We can go into our main page, xaml.cs, and since this is my cars, let's go ahead and add in a public class car. And we'll say string, it's called model. Okay, and we'll just have a get and a set. And then we can come here and we can say car array cars is equal to new array. We'll say new car, where the model is a Mustang. Or maybe we'd like a new car where the model is a Tesla. Or maybe we'd like a new car where the model is a Model T. Maybe we're an old-fashioned kind of guy, really old-fashioned. Or let's go for a little bit more money-minded there, and let's put in a Civic. So I've got this car array, and so I'm just going to go ahead and assign it to my binding context. Now, the binding context is your default binding source in XAML, so it represents all the default data that we would bind to this page. And often your binding context is actually going to be like a view model or something like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here to my list view, and I'm going to say my item source is equal to binding dot, and that says bind to the binding context. Now, as soon as I do that, you can see that I'm getting all my cars here. My cars.car, my cars.car, my cars. So it's just doing a toString on the object, which that's interesting, but that's not really what I want to see. And we could go and override toString, but really the better way to do this with list views, as you know, is to go ahead and set up an item template. And so I can come in here and I can say, let's set this to be a data template, and let's use a text cell. And I'm going to go ahead and bind the text to the model that we added in there. And notice now I get my Mustang, Tesla, Model T, and Civic. So I have my actual models there. Now I might want to start extending this a little bit. So for example, maybe we have a second piece of data that we want to put in here. Maybe let's put in a public string. Oh, how about a top speed? In fact, let's not even make that a string. Let's make that a double. And so I'm going to come down here to all my cars, and we'll say the top speed is 130.54 miles an hour. Top speed, 160. Top speed is 25. And top speed, I'm going to be generous and say there's a headwind and give it a 75. All right, now, notice that my view hasn't changed here. It's still the same, although we've added this new piece of data. Let's go and actually visualize that. So I'm going to say detail is equal to binding top speed. I'm going to save that, and then notice here that we actually can see the top speed 130, 160, 25, 75. Now that's not a great way to display it, so let's add in a string format and say that we would like this to be 0 miles per hour. And then again, you can see that this is happening live. Now I'm kind of moving it around because sometimes Reflector doesn't pick up the changes when the screen just abruptly changes, and so I'm forcing it to actually recognize that there is a change by shifting it down a little bit. But now you can see we get miles per hour tags on there. And we can continue this sort of process. We could say the text color is green, for example, and make it so where the actual cars are printed in green. So there you can see now it's green. But we could actually take this even further. Say, for instance, that we maybe wanted to put in an image here. So I could change this from a text cell and actually make it an image cell. And notice that that didn't really change anything because image cell just derives from text cell. But what it does give me is an actual image property on here. And so now I can set an image source and bind it to something. So let's bind it to an image URL. Now I don't have an image URL in here, and so it's not really doing anything for me yet, but we could put one on here. So let's go up here to the cars, and let's add in a public string image URL. And then let's go down and add one into one of these. Now I've got a web page here. Here it is, and let's just grab, say, one of these images. So I'm going to say I want this one, this PNG right here. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab that URL, and I'm going to put it onto, let's stick it on the Tesla. Right, so we'll set that to be the PNG. And notice now I actually get a little image on the Tesla. This is super cool. I'm able to actually add in this data live. If you're used to using the Xamarin Forms previewer, for example, to be able to sort of design your UIs, you don't have to do that anymore. You can simply use the Live Player. And the cool thing is not only can I add in visualizations like we're seeing here, but check this out. I can actually go in and say, well, what happens when we actually select an item? Let's add an event handler for that. Let's go back to our code behind, scroll down here, and you can see that I have this new event handler that's been added. Let's go ahead and grab our car from selected item, and let's do a this display alert uSelected, and we'll just say c.model. And we'll make it say OK when it's done. Now this is an awaitable API, so I'm going to go ahead and put await on this. And then I'm going to have to go ahead and decorate this with an async. That's all set. Now again, I'm not building this app. I've not built this app. I'm not compiling it here. I don't have a Mac build host. All I've done is save this file. Now I'm going to switch back over here to this main page, and so notice we've got this handler, and I'm just going to tap on Tesla, and notice that I get uSelected Tesla OK. I actually added that event handler. I've added the icon, I've added in all this text, and I've done it all without ever building this app. Right? That's the power of Live Player. This is what Live Player allows us to do. You can actually programmatically construct your app in a REPL sort of form, which makes it really, really nice to be able to start tweaking UI and playing with things within the app itself. And you can take this to any level you like. You can add in view models and start changing those view models, wire up view models with commands. All that kind of stuff works here in the Live Player. The Live Player works with iOS and Android, both forms and native UIs. And so we can do all kinds of stuff with this. This is really, really awesome, and we're really excited about it. Now, let me tell you a little bit about some of the limitations that we do have in the previewer today, just so that you're aware of them. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is a preview of the Xamarin Live Player. And as such, there are some things that don't quite work the way we ultimately will want them to in the final release. And there's some things that we simply can't support given the architecture of what's actually happening here. So the first thing you should be aware of is that this list is not a definitive list. There may be other issues that come up, and that some of these things may change over time as the player matures. But at least as of the initial release today, we have some trouble with some of the AXML Android UI files being rendered properly, and there are some iOS storyboard features that aren't supported yet. And today, we're not able to render zip files at all. Now, the other thing that you should be aware of is when you're deriving from controls, generally that's a supported feature, but there are some UI controls that we have trouble inheriting from, and they won't render properly. It'll be pretty obvious because the app won't run within the Live Player. And in these cases, you simply need to refer back to the original approach of using an emulator, simulator, or a physical device. A couple other things you should be aware of. Reflection has limited support today, and so if you've got applications that use reflection, or if you're using NuGet packages such as JSON.NET that uses reflection in order to implement its features, it's very likely that those things will not work today in the Live Player. In addition, because we need to be able to connect both the device, Visual Studio, and the Azure server together in order to actually complete and make this magic work, firewalls can cause issues. And so if your network is in isolation mode where devices can't see each other, or if you block off a lot of ports, it may be that the Live Player has trouble connecting. In these cases, what you'll find is that the app running on the device won't be able to connect to Visual Studio. And that almost always means that there's a firewall issue that's happening within your network. Finally, because you're running in the context of the Live Player app, things that need to be entitled or provisioned likely will not work today. For example, in iOS, push notifications are not going to be able to work within the Live Player context because your code's actually running inside of the Live Player app that was built by Xamarin. And so what that means is that the identity of the app is actually the Xamarin app and not your app. We're still running your code, but we're doing it in the context of our app shell. And so these things that require app identity or that are specifically enabled via some sort of provisioning profile are not going to work today. Now again, I want to reiterate that this is a preview, and so a lot of these things will change over time. So make sure to watch developer.xamarin.com/live for a list of the current issues that we found, any workarounds that we may know of, or for anything that's actually been fixed and corrected in later releases. One question that comes up is, do I still need a Mac? There's a lot of confusion around this area, and the answer is yes. The Xamarin Live Player is a great way to get started with your application development. You can deploy the app into the Live Player and run your code. You can debug it, step through it, inspect things, make visual changes, but ultimately, at some point you're going to reach a phase in your project where you're going to actually want to install the app on your device and run it directly. And for that, you will need a Mac of some form. That Mac could be on your network, it could be a local Mac sitting on your desk, or it could even be a Mac in the cloud. But you need some sort of Mac to be able to build, package, and then ultimately deploy your application so that you can test it and distribute it to the world. And then finally, we're very interested to know what you think about this. So as you try out the player and you have suggestions, you think of things that you'd like to see, or if you run into any bugs where your code isn't properly running on the player, make sure to let us know. You can report bugs through Bugzilla using the link that's here on the screen. Just select either the Visual Studio for Mac or Visual Studio for Windows, and then report that it's a live player issue. Give us the type of app you're trying to run, the feature you're trying to use, and your experience with it. If possible, you can also collect logs from Visual Studio through the Help menu. If you can add those into the report, that can be massively helpful in trying to reproduce it on our side as well. This is an awesome new technology that we're really excited about, and we really think this is going to improve the developer onboarding experience to being able to do mobile apps with Visual Studio. So that's the Xamarin Live Player. We hope you're going to be as excited about it as we are. Before I end, I just briefly want to talk about Xamarin University. Xamarin University is the go-to place to get trained on mobile development with the Xamarin tools. We have over 80 classes designed to help you be a better mobile developer. There's a lot of free content available here, but we also have a subscriber tier that gives you access to live classes with expert trainers and one-on-one office hours where you can bring your tough questions to the trainers and get real answers. So check out Xamarin University. You can see the link here on the screen. See if it's a fit for you and come learn more about how to build great apps with Xamarin technology. Thanks, and have a great day.